Welcome back to Through Their Eyes. This is Season 3, Episode 2, and the theme for this season is Advice to My Younger Self. And we have the privilege of having with us today Wayne Rogers, of course. Wayne, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Awesome. And then also, for the first time ever, very excited about this, Brother Jim Dearman. Brother Jim, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
We're very thankful to have the opportunity to sit down and talk with Brother Jim. Of course, I would like to get a chance for you to talk about the Good News Today and all of the wonderful things that happened with that while you were doing that.
Well, I'm still involved to some extent, though I'm pretty much retired. But, of course, I hosted and produced it for many years. And it was a part initially of Gospel Broadcasting Network. That's how that program began.
Right.
And then it was determined that a separation would be good based on the natures of the two works, cooperative but separate, and that has worked extremely well for both entities. And of course, Mark Teskey now has taken over as the producer and host and is doing a wonderful job. And the expansion of the work has truly been gratifying to see how it has expanded. But Mark wanted me to stay involved and do a little something on the program. So years ago, many years ago, when I graduated from Memphis School of Preaching in 1976, I had the opportunity to have a program in Birmingham, where my first local work was in that area, and we called it Sound Words. And it was a 15-minute program, and then it expanded, became really Truth for the World later. It evolved into that with Rod Rutherford and others involved. And so when Mark asked me about doing some short segments on the program, I said, well, I think I'll just call them Sound Words and just go back to the beginning and go full cycle. And so that's what my segment is. And they're around a couple of minutes long now, and they're aired every week. And I'm enjoying doing those. I did 156 of them initially.
Wow.
And now I'm 15 short of having 52 more, and I've told them after that I'm done.
That's not bad for retirement.
No,
right?
No, that's right. That'll be 208, and if my math is correct, and I'm not a really good mathematician, that's 4 years worth. So I think that should do for So, but it's been very gratifying, and of course Barry Gilreath Sr. Began the Gospel Broadcasting Network and asked me to be involved, and was involved, just one of my dearest friends ever on earth, and lost him much earlier than we wanted to, obviously.
Yeah.
But he was a great man and a great dreamer. And,
he was visionary.
He was a visionary.
Yep.
He sure was, and because of that, the work of GBN and Good News Today, both of those works have continued and have grown.
Right. Well, I know we're thankful for all that you do with Good News Today and continuing to do that work. I know the new guy at Good News Today fairly well.
Yeah, I think you do, yeah.
He gives me a lot of grief. It really, really gets on my nerves. But no, we appreciate all of the hard work. I have associated Jim Dearman as one of the greatest voiceover voices that we have, because I've heard your voice so often on GBN, and it's just so smooth, and he does a great job. And I love him so much as a gospel preacher and as an example, and we're thankful that we have a chance to ask you what advice you would give to your younger self, because I'll be 31 in October, and people often will say, well, that's not that old, but it's the oldest I've ever been, so give me a break, okay? I need a break here. I'm struggling with it.
Right,
But
exactly.
I often think back to the time that I was a smaller child, around third grade and all the way up to eighth grade, and I think, what would I tell Michael at that age? And I also think, what would I tell Michael as a teenager, and myself as an adult just starting out, and myself as a younger preacher? And as I got to thinking about it, I said, you know what? Let's just interview other preachers. And then at the end of this season, Wayne and I get to interview each other and do the same thing and ask these 4 questions. And we did it that way at the end of the season so that we have not stolen any of what you all will be saying.
Right.
And so, Brother Jim, let me start with this. If you had the ability to give yourself advice as a younger child, age, third grade to 8th grade, what would that advice be, and maybe why?
Well, I think, what comes to mind is what Paul expressed to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:15 when he said, from a child you have known the Holy Scriptures. And that would be my advice to a child who is capable of learning, and they are capable of learning at a very early age. That's why we have cradle roll classes,
Right.
in congregations, because they can learn biblical principles at a very early age. And for a child who is able to learn, obviously, at that point in time, and the age range you've described certainly means he would be or she would be, I would say if that child has Christian parents, be extremely grateful for those parents and take full advantage of the teaching that is available, because so many children do not have that advantage. And of course, the admonition that Paul gave to children, obey your parents in the Lord. And so if you have parents that are in the Lord, what a blessing that is. I was blessed to have such parents, and so I had a good foundation initially. I'll get to some other things when we talk about some other age ranges, but that early foundation was extremely important to me. And I would urge a child to drink in all you can, and if it is the case that you don't have parents who are that involved and that spiritually minded, that is extremely sad, but there are ways that children can access spiritual and scriptural information.
Absolutely. When I think about when our children were growing up, every age, when they hit twos, we said, oh, well, they've hit the twos, and then, threes, and the threes were typical of whatever the threes were, you got the terrible twos and whatever the threes were, and,
right.
All of those things that the parents always talk about. But I think about the teenage years, and I always tell families, look, you need to enjoy whatever phase they're in. They're only there one time,
right.
And so enjoy it, but make the most out of it. And so, thinking about the same question, but to your teenage self, what would you do to give advice to your teenage self?
Well, as I alluded to just a moment ago, I had a good early foundation, but tragically, I think my circumstances were such that, and my nature at the time were such that I was extremely susceptible to peer pressure. And the reason I say that is because I grew up in a small town in Middle Tennessee most of my early childhood. And then we had moved to Nashville ultimately, and I came back to that same hometown in the 8th grade. And I had friends from earlier days who, for some reason, thought that I must view myself as some city slicker who knew more than they did, and they were determined to show me that I didn't. And I had a really rough time initially. I can remember one of my so-called friends being in a barn loft throwing tomatoes at me, in those early days of my return to my hometown. And I wanted to fit in. And I wanted to prove to them that I was not a city slicker who thought I was better than they were. And so, tragically, because of that, I became more like them. And they were not like they should have been.
Right.
And so, my advice to teenagers definitely would be, do not succumb to peer pressure. And it gets back to that childhood stage. If that early foundation is there and is strong, hopefully that will help, especially if you have a good, strong family.
Right.
But if your peers, even my peers in the church at that time, as I recall, were nowhere near what they needed to be spiritually. And so that's no excuse, but it was a tough environment.
Sure.
But because of my propensity to want to fit in and be a part of the group and prove to them that I, had not, risen above them, then that became my undoing spiritually for a long period of time, because I had a period of unfaithfulness as a result of that. So, the peer pressure factor, I think, is so much of a factor, and therefore to teenagers, be strong, yes, but seek out those who are more spiritually minded.
Yeah.
If they are available to you,
Right.
then because as 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, evil companionships corrupt good morals. And in my case, that was a factor that certainly I regret. I remember I was assigned a topic at Knight Arnold, of course now Forest Hill, but years ago on the lectureship there, the evil results of sowing wild oats. And tragically, I think we have far too many parents who feel like it's a natural thing for their teenager to sow his or her, especially his,
Right.
wild oats, and that everything will be fine, ultimately. But there are consequences of sowing wild oats. The memory of having done so is one of them. And of course, the most sobering potential consequence is that young people die also.
Yeah.
And so death could interrupt the sowing.
Yeah. For sure. Wow.
Well, I love the fact that here we are, 3 different stages of life. Obviously, I would have to make fun of myself being the youngest, that I still have a ways to go to get to a level of realization of the best advice to give. And yet, you've given 2 great pieces of advice for 2 stages of your life that it's been a few decades now since you've been in them.
Yeah.
And the hindsight.
Thank you
being
for
able-
reminding me of that.
You're welcome. And I just said a few. As far as I'm concerned, you're 35.
Okay.
And so you have the ability, though, to think back. And sometimes thinking back can be a haunting task. We don't always want to be haunted by our past
Right.
forever, especially if we've been forgiven by God. But a healthy fear, I don't want to go back to that, is good and I think wise. But that brings us to being an adult.
Right.
And what advice, if you were able to go back and you can pick any part of your adulthood, from the time you turned 18 all the way till now, what period of life would you seek to go back to and give some advice to make your life better than it was in that moment by a decision you made?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind because of that period of unfaithfulness is seeking a mate who is going to be a positive influence and not a negative one in terms of your spiritual condition. Now, it's interesting that in my case, we cannot obviously always identify the problems of God, but we know it is a reality.
Right.
And while I was a student at the University of Tennessee, I was able to meet a young woman who was not a Christian at the time, and I was not faithful at the time. But as it turned out, she was a woman with a wonderful heart. And when she was exposed to the truth, ultimately, after I had been transferred to Nashville as a news director of a radio station there, and then transferred again to Birmingham as news director of a station that had been acquired by the same company, we were married, and we had a preacher there locally who was extremely persistent. And he would not leave us alone.
Good for him.
Yeah, good. Oh, yes, I'm eternally grateful.
Yes.
As the expression goes, literally, I will be.
Yep.
And his name was Rex Moorer, and he just kept on, wanting me to play golf with him or something. And of course, I was on radio there, and so he knew that, and we had that exposure. But ultimately, I came home from the radio station one day, and there was a baptismal certificate on the dresser in our bedroom where Janice had called Rex and had said she had been reading Scripture, and Romans 6:3 and 4 especially were just, struck her in a way that she called him and said, "Please meet me at the church building. I've got to be baptized."
Wow.
And she didn't tell me because she didn't want me to think that, she was doing it to try to influence me in any way. So that's why when I came home, I found the baptismal certificate. And the rest is history, as they say, because not too long after that, we were influenced by one of the good elders at Shades Mountain in Birmingham he contacted Roy Hearn, the director of the School of Preaching at that time, because when I was a kid, going back to childhood, we had a preacher named W.J. Lemons, Willie Lemons, and he preached at Gatlinburg for many years before he passed away. But he was a preacher and a good family friend. And people would ask me as a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a redheaded preacher like Brother Lemons, because I had red hair then. I don't have much hair, period, now, but I had red hair then. And so I had that early, inclination, and her influence helped to rekindle it in a way that has led to where we are today. So that gets back to the point that marry a Christian, obviously. That's the best advice.
Sure.
But at least make sure that you're marrying someone who's not going to be antagonistic toward the church, or who is not going to actually hinder your spiritual development. But in my case, she just had a wonderful heart, and I've said it many times, and to her as well, and she always just kind of, because she's just that way, very modest, but her influence has, was just a huge factor. So choosing a mate is extremely important as a young adult.
Absolutely.
Well, when you brought it up already, but you were encouraged to go to preaching school.
Yeah.
And you've
Good
been a gospel preacher for a number of years.
50 years now.
All right. Well, I was going to let you throw the number out there, so I don't want to guess and completely miss it.
Starting with the time I went to school, because I did preach then. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you could go back to any time in your preaching as well, but I would think probably, especially for our listeners, especially probably early on in your preaching, is there something that you would want to do differently, or give some advice to maybe take, some time to think about what you were doing, or just wherever you want to go with that. But I think maybe especially to go to a younger time in your preaching career, and then you might think, okay, a couple decades in, think about maybe another point there that you'd want to.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind, Wayne, is as a younger preacher, I was greatly blessed to locate in the Birmingham area when I left Memphis School of Preaching. And also, there were extension classes that were being given in Birmingham from what was then Alabama Christian School of Religion. And so I was able to take advantage of those classes, but one of them was Brother Franklin Camp's class. And Brother Camp was a tremendous influence in my earlier preaching years. He was such a kind man, obviously scholarly man.
Right. And
he was the kind of man you could call any time, and he never gave you the impression that he wanted to get rid of you on the phone. He would take all the time that you needed. So I think for younger preachers to have an older, sound, faithful gospel preacher upon whom they can call for advice and see as an example and use that advice, because that was helpful to me, extremely helpful to me, to be able to glean from someone who had lived that long and had done that many hours of Bible study. Because there are situations, obviously, that arise in local work that as a younger preacher, you need to be extremely careful about jumping into those with both feet before you do seek the advice of an older, wiser head.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brother Jim, thank you so much for being on this episode with us. We know that you took some special time out of your week to come up here and do this. We're grateful.
I'm grateful for the invitation.
Absolutely. And here's the best part. We've gotten to have a good spiritual boost, shot in the arm. And now, on Thursday, you're going to be back. Not Thursday, this Thursday, but just in the way that we're recording this, it'll come out on Thursday.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I had to get him there. We didn't tell him
we'll
how this
see you
works.
back Thursday.
Yeah, right.
You'll be here, right?
Yeah, right. I don't think anybody will be.
Well, we will be. They'll have to pry us out of here with our cold, dead hands.
Oh, okay.
No, we will be having a special episode come out again. We're about to record it right now, but you won't hear it, our listeners, until Thursday. We got a special email.
Yeah, I heard about that.
I'm going to be reading it to you, and in that email, there are story prompts provided.
Oh,
and I am excited to
at
ask.
my age, I need prompts.
Well, we'll have you back for an episode of Did That Really Happen? It'll come out on the network this upcoming Thursday when this episode goes live. Next week, we have another opportunity to sit down with a preacher, Chris Butler, and ask him these similar questions and try to get the perspective from all different ages and different walks of life and different backgrounds, an opportunity to get them to tell us what advice they'd give to their younger selves. So, Brother Jim, Brother Wayne, thank you both for being with us. We're grateful. And until next time, take care and God bless.